Arena Prime did not orbit a world. It orbited a dying blue star whose light shimmered across the vast metallic petals of the Colosseum like the glow of a fading god. The structure was visible from half a solar system away, a crown of steel and gravitic engines suspended in vacuum, broadcasting every sanctioned duel to billions of civilizations. Its inner arena could reshape itself molecule by molecule, adjusting gravity, atmosphere, terrain, even time perception for spectators who prefer their battles slowed to savor each strike. On this particular cycle, the arena floor was a perfect disk of black alloy veined with silver conduits, humming softly beneath an artificial sun calibrated to resemble a late afternoon on a temperate world. The crowd filled tier upon tier of hovering platforms, species of every imaginable form leaning forward in anticipation. Holographic banners rippled through the air, projecting the name of the reigning champion in 100 languages. Kryss stood alone at the center. She looked almost entirely human at first glance. Tall, balanced, athletic, in a way that suggested both speed and endurance. Her dark combat suit clung seamlessly to her frame, layered with reactive nanofibers that adjusted to heat and impact. A ceremonial mantle rested across one shoulder, etched with the sigils of Arena Prime's most decisive victories. Only when she turned her head did the difference become unmistakable. Her ears were long and elegantly tapered, rising slightly beyond the curve of her skull before narrowing to fine points. They moved with minute precision, responding to the faintest tremor in the air, angling toward the roar of the crowd and then flattening with calm control. Her eyes scanned the opposite entrance. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena, amplified through quantum resonance so that it vibrated in bone and blood alike. Champion Kryss of Arena Prime, undefeated in ritual combat, 37 consecutive victories, 12 by technical incapacitation, 8 by disarmament, 17 by decisive strike within 1 minute. A ripple of admiration swept the stands. And her challenger, Human Coalition soldier Raymond Cole. The opposite gate parted with less ceremony. No burst of light, no grand procession. Just a man stepping into the artificial sunlight and squinting as if someone had opened the curtains too abruptly. Raymond Cole did not look like a legend. He wore standard coalition combat gear, the kind issued in bulk to soldiers who did not expect to see it polished for ceremony. The fabric bore the faint scars of real repair, seams restitched, plating slightly mismatched. A thin line ran along his jaw where an old wound had healed imperfectly. He carried no visible weapon. He stopped several paces from Kryss and looked around slowly, taking in the floating tiers, the shimmering banners, the distant star blazing beyond the transparent energy shield. "Well," he muttered, loud enough for nearby microphones to catch, "this is bigger than the gym back home." A faint murmur of confusion drifted through parts of the crowd. A few human spectators laughed. Kryss did not. She regarded him as one might regard a tool that had been selected for demonstration. Useful, perhaps durable, but ultimately predictable. Her long ears angled forward, attentive. "You understand the terms," she said, her voice steady, carrying without amplification. "Single combat, no external interference. The match concludes upon incapacitation or surrender." Raymond rolled his shoulders once, stretching as if preparing for routine exercise. "That's what they told me, though I was hoping for refreshments first." "There will be no refreshments," she replied. "That's disappointing. I fight better with coffee." A few more scattered laughs. Kryss's expression did not change, but one ear twitched at the unfamiliar cadence of humor. The countdown glyphs ignited above them, translucent numerals visible from every angle. Kryss stepped into stance. Her spear materialized in her hand as a filament of light that condensed into solid form, plasma edge humming faintly. The weapon was as much symbol as instrument, its balance perfected through centuries of codified combat tradition. Every motion she made was economical, precise, refined by ritual repetition. Raymond looked at the spear, then down at his own empty hands. "Ah," he said thoughtfully, "you get a glowing stick. It is a plasma edge spear calibrated to my neural signature." "Right. Glowing stick." A flicker of something, irritation, passed through Kryss's gaze. "You will not require a weapon," she said. The match will conclude within 30 seconds. The statement was not arrogance in her mind. It was calculation. Her previous human opponents had lasted, on average, 22 seconds. The longest had reached 34, and that had required deliberate restraint on her part. Raymond blinked. 30 seconds? Yes. He tilted his head slightly, considering. That's oddly specific. It is generous. He inhaled slowly, the breath of someone accustomed to the thin atmospheres of distant battlefields. All right, he said at last. Let's see how generous we're feeling. The countdown reached 0. Kryss moved. To the untrained eye, she vanished. In reality, she accelerated with neural implants enhancing her reaction speed, crossing the distance in less than a heartbeat. The spear cut a luminous arc aimed not to kill, but to disable, precisely calculated to end the match cleanly. Raymond stepped back. Not dramatically, not with acrobatics. He simply shifted his weight and let the spear pass within a breath of his chest. The plasma edge hissed through the air, missing by centimeters. The crowd gasped. Kryss pivoted seamlessly, reversing grip, striking again, low this time, targeting the joint of his knee. Raymond dropped his center of gravity and turned, the spear grazing his outer thigh plate instead of penetrating. The impact sent a jolt up his leg, but he remained upright. He raised an eyebrow. 2 seconds in and I'm still here. This must be awkward for your statistics. She did not answer. She attacked again, a precise combination drilled into her muscle memory across decades. Thrust, feint, reverse sweep. Raymond did not attempt to counter. He gave ground, absorbing the rhythm without fully engaging, letting her momentum carry past him. The arena floor shifted subtly beneath their feet, adjusting friction coefficients to optimize spectacle. Kryss adapted instantly. Raymond stumbled half a step, caught himself and muttered, "You people really need a level surface." 10 seconds. Kryss increased speed. Her long ears flattened against her head as adrenaline surged. Each strike grew sharper, faster, more decisive. She aimed now not merely to disable, but to overwhelm. Raymond blocked with forearm plating, redirected with open palms, twisted just enough to let lethal arcs skim harmlessly by. He breathed evenly, eyes not on the spear, but on her shoulders, her hips, the micro-adjustments that preceded every attack. 15 seconds. The crowd's roar faltered, confusion threading through excitement. Kryss drove forward in a flawless sequence meant to end resistance. Raymond stepped inside her reach unexpectedly, forcing her to shorten the spear's arc. For a fraction of a second, their faces were close enough for him to see the faint pulse at her temple. "Relax," he said quietly. "You're trying too hard." She struck with her elbow. He absorbed it on his shoulder, grunted and retreated. 20 seconds. Kryss recalculated. No opponent had disrupted her timing like this before. Her victories were built on anticipation of ritual patterns, parries, counters, formalized responses. Raymond offered none. He fought as though expecting betrayal from the air itself. 25 seconds. She leapt, bringing the spear down in a descending strike calculated to pin him to the alloy floor. Raymond rolled, not gracefully, not elegantly, but effectively. The spear embedded briefly in the surface where he had stood, molten alloy spitting outward. He came up on one knee, breathing a little harder now. "You said 30, he called out, glancing toward the still visible timer. "I'd hate for you to miss your deadline." 30 seconds. The numeral flashed. Raymond remained standing. A silence fell across Arena Prime, so sudden it felt like vacuum. Kryss withdrew her spear slowly from the scorched floor. For the first time since entering the arena, uncertainty brushed the edges of her certainty. It was not fear. It was calculation encountering an unpredicted variable. Raymond pushed himself fully upright, flexing his fingers as if testing circulation. "Good news," he said, offering a small lopsided smile. "I'm still destroyable, just not on a schedule." Somewhere in the human section, laughter broke out again. Nervous, incredulous. Kryss's long ears lifted slightly, catching every sound. 30 seconds had passed. The match was only beginning. The silence after the missed deadline did not last long. Arena Prime was not designed for quiet reflection. It was built for spectacle, and spectacle demanded escalation. The alloy beneath their feet rippled as hidden gravitic engines reconfigured the terrain. Segments of the floor lifted into jagged ridges, while other portions sank into shallow depressions filled with fine metallic sand that shimmered under the artificial sun. Kryss adjusted instantly. Her long ears angled outward, reading subtle shifts in air pressure as the arena altered atmospheric density by a fraction. The spear in her hand hummed with renewed intensity, plasma edge brightening as her neural implants synchronized more aggressively with her musculature. Raymond watched the floor move and let out a slow whistle. "Does it do mountains too? I left my hiking boots on Earth." Kryss did not respond. Words had served their purpose. Now she recalibrated. She attacked again, not with the rehearsed sequences that had defined her previous victories, but with something sharper, more adaptive. A thrust angled not where Raymond stood, but where he would need to step to maintain balance on the unstable terrain. He nearly walked into it. At the last instant, he twisted, the plasma edge grazing his shoulder plate. The impact burned through the outer layer, heat flaring against his skin beneath. He hissed through his teeth. "That one counts," he muttered. "I felt it." She pivoted, sweeping low. The metallic sand erupted in a glittering arc. Raymond jumped back, boots sliding slightly as friction coefficients shifted again. He dropped his weight and spread his stance, hands open. "You're fast," he said, almost conversationally. "I have trained since before your species achieved orbital stability," she replied, voice even as she pressed forward. "Good for us," he said. "We're late bloomers." She drove him toward a raised ridge of alloy. He allowed it, retreating deliberately rather than scrambling. His stepped aside and did something unexpected. He grabbed the shaft. The plasma edge flared dangerously close to his ribs, but his gloved hand clamped onto the insulated section just behind the energized blade. For a fraction of a second they were connected by the weapon, faces inches apart. Her eyes narrowed. His grip was not ceremonial. It was desperate and pragmatic, the sort of risk taken when the alternative was death. "Improvise," he said lightly, though strain showed in his jaw. "I read about this in a manual once." "There is no manual for this," she replied. "Exactly." She twisted, activating a rotational surge designed to dislodge any opponent foolish enough to seize her spear. The torque traveled through the weapon like a coiled storm. Raymond released just before the force could tear his shoulder from its socket. He stumbled back, shaking out his hand. "Note to self," he muttered. "Glowing sticks bite." A few scattered chuckles rippled from the human delegation again, tension leaking out in small bursts. Kryss advanced with renewed focus. The 30-second certainty was gone, replaced by calculation layered atop calculation. She increased her neural acceleration further, perception narrowing into precise vectors of movement. To her enhanced senses, Raymond seemed fractionally slower now. She attacked high, then low, then feinted toward his flank. This time the spear's butt struck his ribs with a solid crack. He grunted and staggered. 1 minute passed. The timer glowed above them, indifferent. Raymond inhaled sharply and forced himself upright. He did not counterattack. He circled. The arena floor shifted again, sections tilting slightly to destabilize footing. Kryss compensated instinctively, micro-adjusting her stance. Raymond, however, did something odd. He stepped into the tilt rather than away from it, allowing gravity to pull him a half step faster into position. "You practice on broken ground a lot?" he asked. "My training environments are optimized for perfection," she answered, advancing. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "That explains a few things." Her ears twitched. She launched forward in a burst of speed that blurred her outline. The spear flashed in a diagonal arc meant to disable his dominant arm. Raymond ducked under it, far closer than logic suggested was safe. The plasma edge singed the air above his head. He moved inside her reach again, shoulder colliding with her torso. The impact was not elegant. It was messy and unrefined, but it forced her back half a step. Gasps erupted across the tiers. No one forced champion Kryss backward. She recovered instantly, spinning to regain space. The spear snapped toward him again. He blocked with forearm plating, sparks scattering. 2 minutes. Raymond's movements grew heavier now, small inefficiencies creeping in. His armor bore fresh scorch marks, yet his eyes remained focused, not on the spectacle, but on her breathing, the rise and fall of her chest. "You're adjusting," he observed. "Of course," she replied. "Good," he said. "I was worried you'd get bored." A faint flicker passed across her expression. Confusion, perhaps even the smallest trace of reluctant amusement. Boredom had never entered her mind. Victory had always been inevitable. She altered her pattern again, abandoning familiar combinations entirely. The spear became less a ritual instrument and more an extension of instinct. She tested unpredictable angles, reversed grips mid-strike, allowed herself moments of apparent imbalance to lure him into miscalculation. He did not take the bait. Instead, he retreated, conserving energy. He blocked when necessary, evaded when possible. He allowed her to expend effort. 3 minutes. The artificial sun brightened slightly as the arena adjusted visual contrast for distant spectators. Shadows sharpened across the ridged terrain. Kryss felt the shift in her muscles now. Not fatigue exactly, but expenditure beyond standard parameters. This match was not following the expected trajectory. Raymond wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his glove. "Out of curiosity," he said between breaths, "what happens if we both just keep going?" "There is always a conclusion," she said. Optimistic. She lunged again, faster than before. This time the spear tip pierced the outer layer of his thigh armor. Heat flared and he hissed sharply. That one hurt. He staggered, nearly losing balance as the terrain shifted once more. The crowd roared, sensing the possibility of imminent conclusion. Kryss pressed the advantage, spear darting like a living thing. Raymond retreated across a tilted ridge. His boots slipped slightly on the metallic sand. For a split second, vulnerability opened. She drove the spear forward. At the last instant, he dropped, not backward, but sideways, letting gravity pull him down the incline. The spear sliced through empty air. He slid several meters before digging his heel into a seam in the alloy, stopping his descent. He lay there for half a heartbeat, staring up at the artificial sky. "Still alive," he called out almost cheerfully. "You're going to have to update the brochure." The absurdity of the remark, delivered while bleeding lightly from his leg, triggered a wave of startled laughter from the human section, and even a few uncertain sounds from other species. Kryss stood at the ridge's edge, looking down at him, her long ears angled forward, catching every ripple of sound, every uneven breath he drew. 3.5 minutes. She realized something then. Not fully, not consciously, but enough to unsettle her core assumption. He was not fighting to win in the way arena combat defined victory. He was fighting to remain. The difference mattered. Raymond pushed himself up, wincing but steady. He favored his injured leg slightly, yet his stance remained grounded. "You know," he said, "where I come from, when someone says 30 seconds, we usually start counting up." She descended the ridge slowly, spear poised. "Then we shall continue counting," she replied. 4 minutes. The arena's hum deepened as gravitational intensity increased by a subtle margin, imperceptible to most spectators, but undeniable to the combatants. Kryss adjusted automatically. Raymond felt it and grimaced. "Oh, that's rude," he muttered. "You didn't mention extra gravity." "It is within regulation." "Of course it is." They circled again, no longer in the clean symmetry of ritual, but in the uneven geometry of survival. The dying blue star beyond the shield flared faintly, casting a brief, eerie shimmer through the arena's energy barrier. Kryss inhaled, steadying herself. This was no longer a demonstration. This was adaptation. And the timer continued to climb. Gravity pressed down a fraction harder, subtle but undeniable, as if Arena Prime itself had leaned closer to watch. The hum beneath the alloy floor deepened, a low resonance that vibrated through bone and breath. Above them, the timer glowed with quiet persistence. 4 minutes and counting. Kryss adjusted her stance again, recalibrating muscle output against the increased pull. Her neural implants flickered with faint blue light along her temples, feeding her combat analytics in compressed bursts of probability. Her long ears angled backward briefly, not in fear, but in concentration. This had ceased to be performance. It had become a problem. Raymond rolled his shoulders slowly, testing the strain in his injured leg. The plasma cut along his thigh had sealed itself with emergency foam, but the limb felt heavier now, gravity exaggerating every weakness. "You charge extra for the deluxe gravity package?" he called out. "There is no surcharge," Kryss replied, circling. "Shame. I was hoping to file a complaint." She moved first. No dramatic blur this time. No overt acceleration. Instead, a measured advance. Spear angled slightly lower than before. She probed rather than struck, testing his reactions. A faint twitch of her wrist. A feint toward his injured side. Raymond did not retreat immediately. He shifted weight, inviting the attack. She committed. The spear darted forward, plasma edge humming. Raymond pivoted inward again, but this time Kryss anticipated it. She reversed grip mid-motion, the shaft sliding across her palm with flawless precision, and drove the butt end toward his sternum. It connected. Air burst from his lungs in a harsh exhale. He stumbled back several steps, boots grinding against metallic sand. The crowd roared, sensing momentum swing. He lifted a hand. "Okay," he coughed. "That one's going in the highlights." Kryss pressed forward, eyes sharp. She chained the strike into a high arc, and then a lateral sweep. Raymond blocked the first, barely, and ducked under the second, feeling heat kiss the back of his neck. 5 minutes. The arena floor shifted again. Ridges, flattening into broader platforms separated by narrow trenches that glowed faintly with kinetic energy fields. A misstep would not mean death. Arena Prime prided itself on safety parameters, but it would mean incapacitation. Kryss angled her advance to herd him toward one of the trenches. Raymond noticed. "You trying to push me into the glowing hole?" he asked. "It would conclude the match efficiently." "Efficient for who?" "For reality." He barked a short laugh despite himself. "You're not wrong." She struck again, faster now, forcing him to give ground. His injured leg lagged half a beat behind the other. She targeted it deliberately, spear flicking low. He hopped back awkwardly and nearly overbalanced. For a fraction of a second, gravity and pain conspired against him. Kryss lunged to finish. Raymond did something completely illogical. He dropped to one knee on purpose. The spear sliced through the space where his torso had been. As she overextended slightly, he grabbed a handful of metallic sand and flung it, not at her eyes, but at the ground in front of her leading foot. The friction changed instantly. Her step slipped half an inch. For most opponents, that slip would have meant nothing. For Kryss, whose entire discipline relied on perfect control, it was jarring. Raymond rolled sideways, putting distance between them. "Dirty trick," he said, panting. "Learned it on a moon with worse weather." Kryss straightened, recalculating. "Your technique lacks purity." "Yeah," he agreed. "It's a mess." Another faint murmur of uneasy amusement rippled through the stands. The commentators, once confident in swift analysis, now hesitated before speaking, uncertain what framework to apply. Kryss advanced more cautiously. She abandoned rigid stances entirely, letting instinct guide her footwork. The spear became less symbol and more tool. She attacked with a sudden burst faster than before. Neural acceleration surged. To her perception, the world narrowed into vectors and angles, Raymond's movements mapping themselves in predictive overlays. She aimed for his shoulder joint, then redirected mid-strike toward his throat. Raymond reacted not by blocking the blade, but by stepping directly into her space again, chest nearly colliding with the shaft. The plasma edge passed behind him, close enough to scorch the air. He trapped the spear under his arm for a heartbeat, using his body weight to disrupt her leverage. They stood locked like that, close enough to feel each other's breath. "You're overthinking it," he said quietly. "I do not overthink," she replied. "Sure you do. You've got lights in your head." Her eyes flicked upward involuntarily, toward the faint glow at her temples. For the briefest moment, surprise broke through discipline. He used that moment to shove off and retreat. 5.5 minutes. Kryss felt something unfamiliar rising. Not panic, not fear. Frustration, perhaps. Or the first fracture in certainty. She had always known what victory felt like long before it arrived. It had a rhythm, a tightening inevitability. This did not. Raymond bent slightly at the waist, hands resting briefly on his thighs as he drew breath. His chest rose and fell more heavily now. Sweat traced along his jaw, mixing with dust. Quick question, he said between breaths. Do you ever train without the rule book? My training encompasses all recognized forms of combat. Recognized by who? By Arena Prime. He nodded slowly. That might be the problem. Her ears twitched again, angling forward. 6 minutes. The gravitational field increased another marginal increment. Not enough to crush, but enough to remind. Raymond felt it immediately, shoulders dipping. Ah, he groaned softly. Now it's personal. Kryss moved again, this time without announcing it through posture. She feinted high and struck low in the same fluid motion, spear tip grazing his injured thigh once more. The emergency foam cracked, pain flaring sharp and bright. Raymond stumbled and this time did not fully recover balance. He fell to one knee, one hand braced against the alloy. The crowd surged to its feet. Kryss stepped forward, spear leveled at his chest. The timer blinked past 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Yield, she said. Raymond looked up at her, breathing hard. His expression was not defiant in the theatrical sense. It was tired, honest. Can't, he said. Your leg is compromised. Been worse. This match is concluded. He glanced up at the timer. Doesn't look concluded. For a moment she hesitated. In ritual combat, this was the point where opponents yielded. Pride preserved, spectacle maintained. The codex allowed for honorable surrender. Raymond pushed himself upright slowly, wincing as he shifted weight back onto his injured leg. I didn't come here to win, he said quietly. I came here to stand. The words did not carry the way her proclamations had earlier. They were not meant for the crowd. They were meant for her. Kryss felt the gravitational pull not only in her limbs but somewhere deeper. Her entire career had been built on structured superiority. Every opponent had entered her framework. Every victory had confirmed it. He refused to. 7 minutes approached. The arena lights adjusted again, artificial sun dipping slightly to cast longer shadows across the platforms. The trenches glowed brighter, kinetic energy fields humming. Kryss lifted her spear once more. But this time, when she advanced, there was less ceremony in the motion and more inquiry. Raymond straightened as much as his injuries allowed and raised his hands again, open, ready. Still 30 seconds? He asked faintly. She regarded him, long ears angling outward as if tasting the air of a new possibility. No, she said at last. Then she attacked again, not to end him swiftly, but to understand why she could not. Kryss moved differently now. There was no dramatic acceleration spike, no luminous blur designed to overwhelm. Instead, she advanced with deliberate control, her spear angled not as an executioner's blade, but as a question. Raymond saw the change immediately. That look, he said, shifting his stance despite the protest from his injured leg. That's the, I'm thinking about this look. I am always thinking, she replied. Yeah, but now you're curious. That's worse. She attacked, not with raw speed, but with layered unpredictability. A high thrust that dissolved halfway into a lateral sweep, a retreat that turned into a forward pivot. She was no longer reciting from memory. She was improvising. Raymond adjusted, slower than before but steady. He absorbed the first strike on his forearm plate, redirected the second with an open palm, and stepped into her space to collapse the spear's effective range. The gravitational field pulsed again, increasing by another subtle fraction. The trenches along the arena floor glowed brighter, kinetic energy fields humming in rising resonance. Arena Prime was escalating parameters automatically, algorithms recognizing prolonged engagement and enhancing spectacle. Raymond felt the shift immediately. Oh, come on, he muttered. Is there a loyalty program for surviving this long? There is only progression, Kryss replied, circling. That's not comforting. 8 minutes. The artificial sun dimmed slightly, shifting color temperature to simulate late dusk. Shadows lengthened across the alloy ridges, forcing sharper contrast and quicker adjustments of vision. Kryss lunged low, spear tip grazing the edge of Raymond's damaged thigh armor again. He twisted away, but not fully. Pain flared sharp and immediate. He hissed through his teeth. You really like that leg. It is strategically vulnerable. Feels that way. She pressed forward, forcing him toward one of the glowing trenches. He pivoted awkwardly, nearly losing balance under the compounded gravity. His breathing was heavier now, each inhale measured. Kryss saw it. She saw the fatigue, the micro delays in reaction, the slight tremor in his injured leg. In ritual combat, this was the moment of elegant conclusion, but instead of delivering it, she shifted her approach. She disengaged. 2 steps back. Spear lowered a fraction. Raymond blinked. "That's new." "You adapt," she said. "So will I." He gave a breathless half-smile. "I was hoping you'd say that before the leg fell off." A ripple of uncertain laughter traveled through the human section of the stands. Even some non-human spectators produced low harmonic sounds that approximated amusement. Kryss adjusted her neural implants downward slightly, reducing acceleration to baseline organic speed. The faint blue glow at her temples dimmed. Raymond noticed. "Did you just turn off the turbo mode?" he asked. "Yes." "Why?" "To remove distortion." He tilted his head. "Distortion?" "Artificial advantage." He stared at her for half a second longer than necessary. "You didn't have to do that." "I am not certain that I did." 9 minutes. The arena's central AI recalibrated again. The terrain flattened abruptly, trenches sealing, ridges sinking until the floor became a broad open plain. Gravity stabilized at its current elevated level. The system had shifted from environmental complexity to raw endurance. Kryss lifted her spear again. This time her movements were stripped of spectacle entirely. No flourishes, no codified sequences. She stepped forward and struck in a straight line. Raymond blocked, barely. The impact rattled his arm to the shoulder. She followed with a second strike, faster. He sidestepped instead of parrying, letting the spear cut through empty air. They circled each other slowly now, boots scraping against alloy. "You ever lose?" he asked between breaths. "No." "Not even once?" "No." He nodded thoughtfully. "That explains a lot." She frowned faintly. "Explain." "You don't know what it feels like when everything you train for doesn't work." Her long ears angled forward, alert. She attacked again, this time with controlled aggression. The spear tip flicked toward his shoulder, then his hip, then his throat in rapid succession. He retreated step by step, conserving energy. "I know defeat conceptually," she said. "That's not the same." "Clarify." He ducked under a sweeping arc and answered from a crouch. "Conceptual defeat is tidy. Real defeat is messy. It leaves dents." He tapped the scar along his jaw with 2 fingers. She lunged again, forcing him back. "You assume I lack experience with consequence," she said. "Not consequence," he corrected. "Uncertainty." 10 minutes. The timer glowed with quiet insistence above them. The crowd's energy had shifted. It was no longer roaring for swift victory. It was leaning forward, captivated by something unscripted. Kryss felt it, the expectation pressing in from every direction, the weight of reputation. She attacked with sudden intensity, spear a blur once more, testing whether raw dominance could still close the gap. Raymond struggled to keep pace. One strike clipped his shoulder, another grazed his ribs. He stumbled backward, nearly collapsing. She advanced, spear poised at his chest. "Yield," she said again. He laughed softly, breathless. "You keep asking like it's an option." "It is. For you, maybe." She studied him for a long heartbeat. His stance was uneven. His leg trembled. Sweat dripped from his brow, yet his eyes were steady. "You do not fear incapacitation," she observed. "I fear a lot of things," he said. "Just not this." She hesitated. The gravitational field pulsed again without warning, a brief spike beyond previous levels. Raymond's injured leg buckled under the sudden strain, and he dropped hard to one knee, palms slamming against the alloy. The crowd gasped. Kryss felt the spike too, but her training absorbed it. She remained upright, spear raised. Raymond looked up at her from below, breathing heavily. "Well," he said between breaths, "if you were going to destroy me in 30 seconds, you're slightly behind schedule." A short, involuntary sound escaped her, half exhale, half suppressed laugh. It startled both of them. "You find this amusing?" she asked. "Only because if I stop joking, I'll notice how much this hurts." She lowered the spear slightly. The arena AI detected hesitation, and began recalibrating environmental variables again, seeking renewed escalation. Kryss lifted her gaze briefly toward the distant tiers of spectators, billions watching, expecting. Then she deactivated the plasma edge. The spear's luminous blade dimmed to inert metal. A wave of stunned murmurs rippled outward. Raymond blinked up at her. "Did you just—" "Yes," she said. "Is that allowed?" She considered. "It is not prohibited." He pushed himself slowly back to his feet, favoring his leg more heavily now. "You're full of technicalities," he said. "Precision matters." "Not always." She regarded him, long ears angled outward in a posture no one in Arena Prime had seen before. Uncertainty openly acknowledged. "Teach me," she said. Raymond stared at her as if gravity had spiked again. "In the middle of the fight?" "Yes." He looked around at the vast arena, the hovering platforms, the timer ticking past 11 minutes. "You picked a weird classroom," he said. Kryss adjusted her grip on the now inert spear. "Then demonstrate," she said, stepping forward, not as conqueror, but as student. And the arena, built for decisive endings, found itself hosting something it had never been programmed to measure. The arena did not know what to do with a lesson. Its systems were built for escalation, for clean conclusions, for victory or defeat measured in clear biometric thresholds. Yet at the center of the alloy plane stood Champion Kryss with her plasma edge deactivated, spear reduced to tempered metal, and a human soldier who looked as though gravity itself had personally offended him. Raymond shifted his weight carefully and eyed the inert spear. "All right," he said slowly. "First thing, when you fight someone who doesn't care about winning pretty, you stop thinking about finishing moves." "I have already done so," Kryss replied. "You stopped using the glow. That's not the same." Her long ears angled forward slightly. "Clarify." He stepped closer, limping only a fraction. The timer ticked past 12 minutes above them, bright and indifferent. "You fight like every exchange has to be decisive," he said. "Out there," he gestured vaguely toward the transparent energy shield and the distant star beyond it. "Most fights aren't decisive. They're ugly. They drag. They confuse." "This is not out there," she said. "Exactly." The gravitational field pulsed again, but instead of increasing, it fluctuated unpredictably. Arena Prime's adaptive algorithms were searching for engagement parameters, unable to categorize what was unfolding. Raymond felt the irregular pull and raised an eyebrow. "Is the floor nervous?" "The arena responds to anomaly," Kryss said. "Good, let it." She adjusted her stance, lower, her center of gravity slightly in imitation of his earlier posture. "Show me," she said. Raymond exhaled slowly and moved first, not with aggression but with subtlety. He stepped toward her left side, then abruptly shifted right, not to strike but to test her reaction. She mirrored him precisely. "Too clean," he muttered. He advanced again, this time closing distance abruptly and bumping his shoulder against her upper arm. Not hard enough to injure, just enough to disrupt. She did not retaliate immediately. "That was inefficient," she observed. "Yep," he said. "Works anyway." He pivoted around her, forcing her to turn. The irregular gravity tugged at both of them in uneven pulses. "You anticipate patterns," he continued, "but sometimes the best move is the one that makes no sense." "There is always sense," she countered. "Not in the moment." He lunged clumsily toward her right flank, telegraphing the motion so obviously that even a novice would see it coming. Kryss prepared a counter. At the last instant, he abandoned the lunge entirely and simply stepped back. She froze mid-response. "See?" he said, breathing a little heavier. "You prepared to punish something that never happened." Her ears flattened briefly in thought. "You wasted motion." "Correct." "And you risked exposure." "Also correct." "And yet you consider this superior?" He gave a faint grin. "I consider it confusing." The crowd, once restless, had grown quiet. Billions of eyes watched two combatants circle without spectacle, tension replaced by something more complex. Kryss moved next. She stepped forward without feint or flourish and pressed the shaft of her spear lightly against his shoulder, testing reaction speed. He did not swat it away. He let it rest there for a second. "You're waiting for me to do something dramatic," he said. "Yes." "I won't." She nudged harder, increasing pressure. He stepped sideways instead of back, forcing her to adjust or lose contact. She adapted, but the motion cost her half a second of recalibration. Again, she said. They moved in slow, deliberate patterns now. No plasma arcs, no explosive lunges, just bodies shifting under irregular gravity, each seeking advantage in subtle imbalance. 13 minutes. Raymond's injured leg trembled more visibly now. Sweat dampened his collar, yet his eyes remained alert. "You're conserving energy," Kryss observed. "Always," he said. "You can't win a long fight if you burn everything in the first minute." Her gaze flicked briefly toward the timer. "My doctrine emphasizes rapid resolution," she said, "because you can." "And that is flawed?" "Not flawed," he replied. "Incomplete." The arena AI, dissatisfied with the lack of dramatic spikes in biometric stress, introduced another variable. The artificial sun dimmed further, bathing the floor in deep amber light. Temperature dropped several degrees. Raymond shivered faintly. "Now it's moody." "Environmental variation is standard," Kryss said. "Feels like it's sulking." She stepped forward again, this time striking, not with the spear's edge, but with the blunt end aimed at his midsection. He blocked with both forearms, absorbing the impact. She followed immediately with a knee toward his injured leg. He twisted, barely avoiding direct contact, and stumbled back. Pain flared sharp and immediate. He sucked in a breath. "That," he said through clenched teeth, "is still effective." "You are compromised." "Story of my life." She paused again, spear hovering inches from his chest. "Your leg weakens," she said. "Your endurance declines. Why persist?" He looked up at her, face drawn but steady. "Because stopping isn't the point." "What is?" "Staying." The word lingered between them. 14 minutes. The gravitational fluctuations stabilized at a slightly lower intensity, as if the arena itself had begun to listen. Kryss lowered the spear entirely. "Strike me," she said. Raymond blinked. "Excuse me?" "Attack. Without pattern." He stared at her for a long second, then shrugged faintly. "All right, but I'm not apologizing." He moved abruptly, not with elegance, but with raw intent. A quick jab toward her shoulder, immediately followed by a low sweep of his foot, not to knock her down, but to destabilize. She blocked the jab, but did not anticipate the sweep in time. Her footing shifted half an inch. For a moment, the champion of Arena Prime wobbled. Raymond stepped back immediately instead of capitalizing. "You didn't follow through," she said. "I'm not trying to win," he replied. "Then what are you attempting?" "To show you that the world doesn't wait for perfect form." She absorbed that in silence. 15 minutes. The crowd's tension had transformed into something almost reverent. No one shouted now. No one demanded resolution. Kryss lifted her gaze toward the timer once more. "I declared 30 seconds, she said quietly. "You were optimistic," Raymond replied. She looked back at him, long ears angling outward in a posture that now held no arrogance. "As certain," she corrected. He gave a tired half smile. "Certainty's comfortable." "And uncertainty?" He exhaled slowly. "That's where you learn." The arena lights shifted again, this time not in escalation but in balance. White light returning, shadows evening out. The environmental systems ceased their interference. Kryss reactivated the plasma edge, but at minimal intensity, blade glowing softly rather than blazing. She stepped forward, spear raised, not to dominate, but to test this new understanding within real motion. Raymond adjusted his stance once more, leg trembling, breath steadying. "Round 2 of the lesson?" he asked. She inclined her head slightly. "Yes," she said, and they moved again. Not as executioner and victim, not as champion and challenger, but as two warriors navigating the space between certainty and survival, while the timer continued its relentless climb. The plasma edge hummed again, but only faintly, a thin crescent of contained energy rather than the roaring arc it had been before. Kryss held the spear as if reacquainting herself with an old companion under new terms. The timer above them passed 16 minutes, glowing like a quiet accusation. Raymond rolled his neck once and flexed his fingers. His injured leg trembled openly now, emergency foam cracking along the seam of his thigh plate. He noticed Kryss's gaze linger there. "If you're thinking about it," he said, Yes, it still hurts. You conceal it poorly, she replied. I'm not trying to hide it. She stepped forward. This time the attack was direct. No flourish, no feint. A straight thrust aimed center mass. Raymond shifted slightly offline, redirecting the shaft with both palms. The plasma edge brushed his armor, but did not bite. She followed with a quick rotation, blade sweeping toward his ribs. He stepped inside again, collapsing distance so the spear became awkward rather than lethal. Their shoulders collided. The impact sent a dull vibration through both of them. Raymond winced. Kryss absorbed it without expression. You insist on closing distance, she observed. Harder to swing a glowing stick when I'm this close. It is not a stick. Feels like one. Her long ears twitched faintly, almost imperceptibly. She disengaged, then re-engaged immediately from a lower angle, spear tip darting toward his weakened leg. Raymond anticipated it this time and shifted weight preemptively, letting the strike glance off plating rather than penetrate. Better, she said. See? I'm coachable. 17 minutes. The arena floor vibrated softly. Overhead, microscopic drones adjusted atmospheric composition by fractions, maintaining optimal oxygen for prolonged exertion. Arena Prime was no longer escalating aggressively. It was sustaining. Kryss noticed the shift. The arena had stopped trying to end the match. Raymond noticed too. It's giving up on the dramatic finish, he said. It has recalibrated. Smart arena. She attacked again, faster now, testing his reaction under fatigue. The spear flicked high, then reversed low, then snapped toward his shoulder in a tight arc. Raymond blocked two, absorbed the third poorly and staggered. She advanced, pressing him back step by step. You cannot maintain this indefinitely, she said. No argument there. Then why persist? He ducked under a horizontal sweep and answered from beneath the arc of her weapon. Because stopping now would mean you were right. Her eyes narrowed slightly. About 30 seconds? About certainty. She pivoted and struck again. He retreated unevenly, leg buckling briefly before recovering. 18 minutes. Sweat traced down Kryss's temple despite her controlled breathing. Her neural implants remained at minimal enhancement, but the physical toll was undeniable. This was no longer a ritual bout of explosive dominance. It was sustained adaptation. She altered rhythm abruptly, stepping back instead of forward. Raymond blinked. That's new again. I am assessing. Mid-fight? Yes. He gave a faint, tired grin. You're going to make terrible arena statistics. She tilted her head slightly. Explain. They won't know what to call this. She stepped forward once more, but slower. The spear's plasma edge dimmed further, barely more than a heated outline. Strike me again, she said. Raymond sighed theatrically. You keep asking for that. One day you'll regret it. Proceed. He moved clumsily on purpose at first, an exaggerated swing toward her left side. She blocked easily. Then he shifted unexpectedly, driving a short, sharp jab toward her shoulder joint, following with a quick knee toward her thigh. She absorbed the jab but felt the knee connect. Not hard, but real. She stepped back half a pace. The crowd inhaled collectively. You are not maximizing force, she observed. No, he agreed. I'm testing balance. Mine. Both. 19 minutes. The artificial sun brightened again, returning the arena to neutral illumination. No shadows to hide in. No dramatic silhouettes. Kryss lifted her spear and attacked with renewed intent, not to overwhelm, but to probe at the edges of what he had shown her. She feinted high, then instead of striking, she stepped sideways into his path, shoulder brushing his chest deliberately. Raymond blinked. Was that? Disruption, she said. He laughed softly despite the pain in his ribs. You're learning. She followed with a low sweep, not of the spear, but of her foot. Raymond barely caught himself before falling. Okay, he muttered. Now you're stealing my tricks. They are effective. Yeah, they are. 20 minutes. The timer glowed like a monument. Raymond's breathing was ragged now. Each inhale carried a faint tremor. His injured leg threatened to give out entirely. Kryss saw it clearly. She advanced and struck with sudden speed, spear snapping toward his midsection. He blocked, but his reaction lagged by a fraction. The shaft slammed into his chest, driving him backward. He fell. Hard. The alloy floor reverberated under the impact. For a heartbeat, he did not move. The crowd erupted, thinking the conclusion had finally arrived. Kryss stood over him, spear angled downward. "Yield," she said quietly. Raymond lay on his back, staring up at the artificial sky. His chest rose and fell unevenly. The gravity pressed heavier than before, though the arena had not increased it. He turned his head slightly to look at her. "You're getting better," he said hoarsely. "This is not a compliment." "It is." He rolled slowly onto his side, pushing himself up with visible effort. His leg shook violently as he forced it to bear weight. "You are compromised beyond efficiency," she said. "Probably," he admitted. "Then why?" "Because if I stand again," he interrupted, "then your 30 seconds never mattered." The words hung in the air between them. 21 minutes. She hesitated. In that hesitation lay something vast, more significant than victory. He rose fully to his feet, swaying slightly but upright. "There," he said faintly. "Still standing." Kryss lowered her spear completely. The plasma edge flickered and extinguished. Gasps rolled across the arena tiers. "You choose to disengage?" she asked. "No," he said. "You do." She regarded him, long ears angled outward in open contemplation. "I no longer seek to end you," she said. "Good," he replied. "I'm running low on dramatic last words." A soft, unexpected sound escaped her again, closer to laughter this time. The arena systems paused, uncertain. For the first time since Arena Prime had been constructed, a champion and a challenger stood facing one another without active aggression, while the timer continued its climb. 22 minutes. Kryss extended the spear horizontally, offering it to him. Raymond stared at it. "What am I supposed to do with that?" he asked. "Hold it," she said. "That seems like a trap." "It is not." He reached out cautiously and wrapped his hand around the shaft beside hers. The metal was warm but inert. They stood there for a moment, connected by the same weapon that had nearly ended him dozens of times. "You survived," she said. "You adapted," he replied. The arena hummed softly around them, billions watching in silence. And the timer, indifferent and unwavering, continued to count. The timer reached 23 minutes, and still no system tone signaled conclusion. Kryss and Raymond stood facing one another at the center of Arena Prime, both holding the same spear. The plasma edge remained dark. Around them, the vast tiers of spectators were silent in a way the arena had never recorded before. No chants, no wagers shouted across translation fields, only breath. Raymond loosened his grip first. "If this thing suddenly turns back on, I'm blaming you," he said. "It will not," Kryss replied. "You sound very confident for someone who just dismantled her own rulebook." She studied him, long ears angled outward in a posture no longer rigid, no longer defensive. Open. "I declared I would destroy you in 30 seconds, she said. "I was wrong." He raised an eyebrow. "That's it? No dramatic speech? No star exploding in the background?" "The star is not scheduled to explode for several millennia." "Good, I've got plans." A faint ripple of sound moved through the crowd, uncertain laughter breaking the paralysis. The arena's central AI, deprived of decisive metrics, initiated procedural review. Overhead, holographic glyphs flickered uncertainly, cycling through categories: victory, defeat, technical draw, disqualification. None applied cleanly. Kryss released the spear entirely and let it fall to the alloy floor. It struck with a dull metallic note that echoed across the arena more loudly than any plasma arc had. Gasps rolled outward in waves. Raymond glanced down at the spear, then back up at her. "You just dropped it." "Yes." "That's new." She turned slowly, facing the tiers of spectators. Billions of eyes followed her movement. The artificial sun brightened to full, clarity bathing the arena in unfiltered light. "For cycles beyond counting," she said, her voice carrying without amplification, "I have defined strength as dominance within structure. I have measured victory in speed and precision. I believed certainty was proof of superiority." The words traveled across species and systems, translated in real time by quantum relays. "I was incorrect." The statement did more to shake Arena Prime than any blow. Raymond shifted his weight carefully, trying not to wince. You're really going to say that out loud? Yes. Brave. Her long ears lifted slightly. Strength is not only the capacity to end a conflict quickly, she continued, it is the capacity to endure uncertainty without surrendering integrity. A murmur passed through the crowd, confusion for some, revelation for others. Raymond leaned closer. You realize they were expecting a dramatic knockout. They have received something else. Yeah, he muttered. An existential crisis. The arena AI finally projected a neutral glyph above them. Resolution pending. Kryss turned back to Raymond. You did not attempt to defeat me, she said. No, he agreed. That would have gone badly. You sought only to remain. Pretty much. Why? He looked up at the distant blue star beyond the energy shield, its light flickering faintly as it aged. Where I'm from, he said slowly, winning isn't always an option. Sometimes staying upright is the only victory you get. She absorbed that. In the stands, the human delegation had risen to their feet, not cheering wildly, just standing. Kryss stepped forward again, not to strike, not to test, but to close the distance as equals. I sought to measure you by my doctrine, she said. You forced me to confront its limits. Raymond smiled faintly. Happy to help. You have altered the arena. I think the arena altered you. She considered that. Perhaps both. 24 minutes. The timer continued its climb, but its authority had faded. The arena's governing council, visible now as luminous projections in the upper tiers, exchanged silent signals. Metrics scrolled rapidly behind them. Combat efficiency, energy expenditure, spectator engagement indices. None captured what had occurred. Kryss lifted her gaze to the council. I request reclassification, she said. A pause. Reclassification? One projection echoed. Yes. Combat outcome, mutual acknowledgement. The council's projections flickered with static, struggling to process terminology not encoded in their systems. Raymond scratched his jaw. That's not going to fit on a trophy. There will be no trophy, Kryss replied. Even better. The council's lead projection finally stabilized. Arena Prime recognizes the unprecedented nature of this engagement. No victor declared. A collective inhale moved through the tiers. No victor, the projection repeated. No defeat. The neutral glyph above the arena shifted, dissolving into a simple line of light. Match concluded. The timer froze at 24 minutes and 17 seconds. Raymond exhaled slowly, relief washing through him like a delayed shockwave. His injured leg trembled once more before finally giving way. He caught himself against Kryss's shoulder. Easy, she said, steadying him. Don't read into that, he muttered. Gravity and I are having a disagreement. She allowed the contact. Medical drones descended from above, humming softly. One hovered near Raymond's leg, projecting a diagnostic grid across the damaged plating. You require repair, Kryss observed. Yeah, he said. Preferably before I try to walk off this thing. The drones began sealing his wound more effectively, dissolving the emergency foam and replacing it with regenerative gel. Kryss watched the process with open interest rather than distant superiority. You endured beyond my projection, she said quietly. You adjusted beyond mine, he replied. She looked toward the spear lying on the floor. I once believed that losing would diminish me, she said. You didn't lose. I was wrong, she corrected. That is not diminishment. Raymond chuckled softly. Welcome to uncertainty. The arena's tears began to stir again, not with wild applause, but with something steadier, a rising wave of acknowledgement that crossed species and cultures. Kryss turned toward the crowd one final time. Strength, she said, is not confined to ritual. Her long ears stood tall now, not rigid with pride, but alive with awareness. Raymond straightened as the medical drones completed their work. His leg felt stable again, though fatigue still clung to him. So, he said, glancing at the frozen timer, does this mean I survived the 30 seconds? You surpassed them, she replied. Good. I was starting to think my watch was broken. She allowed herself a small, unguarded smile. Raymond Cole, she said, will you return to Arena Prime? He looked around at the immense structure, the dying star beyond, the billions of witnesses. Maybe, he said, but next time I'm bringing coffee. I will ensure refreshments are available. That's growth, he said approvingly. Together they walked, slowly, not as champion and challenger, but as equals, toward the central platform where the council projections awaited formal acknowledgement. Behind them, the spear remained on the alloy floor, no longer symbol of dominance but relic of transformation. Above them, the blue star flickered on, indifferent yet illuminating. And Arena Prime, built to measure victory in seconds, had learned to count in something far less precise and far more enduring.